The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
I had started to realize there were some common tools that were shared by all great leaders. These shared tools within their systems of doing things that are also relevant to us as sports teams. So as I started to realize there's all these shared tools, there's also the best organizations or leaders use systems to help implement those tools consistently over time.
JP Nerbun is the founder of Thrive on Challenge, a mentor, writer, coach, and sports consultant. In his new book, The Culture System, JP shares a proven process that will help you find joy and fulfillment as a coach while getting the results you desire. Supported by the latest research in motivation, behavioral psychology, and neuroscience, and full of practical strategies and real examples, The Culture System gives you the power to create an extraordinary culture, no matter your sport, level, or circumstances. Hey Hoopheads, practice like the pros this July with our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market. Save up to $4,000 on multi-unit orders in the month of July. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Pete Alexandru, coach at CAI Postgrad based out of Clearwater, Florida, and you're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Follow us on social media at hoopheadspod on Twitter and Instagram. And be sure to check out the Hoopheads Podcast Network for more great basketball content. Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its play bank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball. Have your pen and paper ready as you listen to this episode with JP Nerbun from Thrive on Challenge. Hello, and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host, Jason Suckle, tonight. But I am pleased to welcome back to the podcast for his third appearance, JP Nerbun from Thrive on Challenge and author of the new book, The Culture System. JP, welcome back.
Mike, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Exclusive club. Third time. I don't have Jason on with me tonight. He's with taking care of his youngest daughter, so he is not on to do some quick research as to how many people we've had on 3 times. But I know it's a pretty exclusive club, so excited to have you on. As I was telling you before we jumped on the podcast together here tonight, just got an opportunity to, after you sent me your new book, got a chance to go through it, read it. It's a tremendous guide for coaches who want to be able to implement and improve their team culture. We're going to go through all the different steps and pieces that you have as part of the book. But before we start, why don't you give people just first of all, a quick rundown for maybe people who didn't hear the first 2 episodes. Give us a quick rundown of who you are, what you do, and then we'll dive into the book.
Yeah, Mike, and I guess for all the listeners, it's been 6-7 years now on this journey of focusing on culture and helping support coaches. And that kind of, TOC evolved out of my work as a coach. As I was mostly coaching high school athletes, but also did college and some semi-professional basketball internationally. So, but yeah, I kind of hit a rock bottom as a coach. I've had some good cultures over the years. I've had some okay cultures, but I was kind of having a string of bad cultures and not having the relationships that I wanted with my players, the impact, the level of standards that I wanted in the program. And so kind of dove in all in on this culture thing and started studying, reading, then started a blog like many people might do to share my journey or my learnings. And then I started a podcast to continue to share and, invite people that I was reading their books and stuff like that. So, just really all culture based and leadership based. And that wasn't always interviewing or reading about, coaches. It was oftentimes leaders, or it was, behavioral scientists, just anything I can get my hands on that I thought could help me impact lives better. Or meet the needs of athletes or even coaches. So from that, it just started to be a lot of conversations with coaches to help support them. I guess in, three big ways. The clear, obvious one is to help them build their team's culture, the practical things they might do with their team. So I've been doing that for 6 years, and also to help them within their own leadership. In the leadership challenges and managing their own situations and their own conflicts that might come up, internal, not just external within the team. And then lastly, it also has a level of kind of personal development within coaches and just helping them to grow as people. This whole journey, I say that all is been a shared journey with the people I've worked with. It's not just about them. I've been on the road and the journey, and I continue to be on the road and the journey for my own leadership and my own personal growth as well too. So it's been a special few years for sure.
When you sat down to write this book, what was the thought process behind putting it together into the format that you chose, and why did it come out to be this roadmap for coaches who want to implement the culture system? Just explain sort of the why behind this book.
After my last book, Calling Up, I had this moment where it's interesting when you write a book, it takes so long that, you start to learn things along the way, and new things that won't be included in the current book. And I'd already started working with coaches, in this way, this one-on-one supportive way. So at the end of Calling Up, when I was ready to release it, I actually started, this is back in 2019, so this is many years ago now, I started the outline for the culture system, or what eventually became the culture system. And what I had realized at that time early on was coaches needed not just, a bag of tools or ideas, like things to do with their team. They needed those tools, those methods, those strategies. They needed them in a way that they could be consistent about them over time, that they could implement these things and they would be able to layer these things within their program to have the impact that they wanted. So it kind of came from this idea that, I had started to realize there were some common tools that were shared by all great leaders, whether it's John Wooden and his non-negotiable, and Pete Carroll and his non-negotiables, or Monty Williams and his non-negotiables. But it's also, Mike Abrashoff, the leader of USS Benfold, who took one of the worst ships in the Navy and made it the best ship in the Navy. It's shared tools that Amazon uses and Toyota has used for, almost a century. That these shared tools of within their systems of doing things that are also relevant to us as a sports teams. So as I started to realize there's all these shared tools, there's also the best organizations or leaders use systems to help implement those tools consistently over time. So it's been a process and journey to figure out what that looks like. And the cool thing is it's not about like what fits best in a book, the last 4 years have been about how I've helped coaches actually do that within their own programs, within their own teams. That's been our testing ground. And as we've experienced that and learned from that, that's helped shape the book.
I think the most interesting part to me when I first picked up the book is you open it up and you expect to start immediately jumping into how can I improve my team's culture? But instead, what you start with is how do I improve myself so that I can be the best leader that I can be for my team? So why was it so important to start the book in your mind with you got to improve yourself?
That's a great debatable piece of the book that I consider multiple times cutting, because it's the culture system, and it's like, okay, do I just focus on the system of, developing the culture and, over time, but if I didn't include the leader and how you work on yourself as a leader, then the leader is the driver of the culture, and a car is only as good as its driver. So it was vital that we focused on the leader themselves. That's at the core of it. My hesitation in doing, a leadership philosophy and mission, vision, values, and disciplines was I'd covered a lot of it in my first book, but B, it's been covered a lot in other books. But I think what I've learned over time in working with coaches is how to take these type of things and develop maybe a system within the coach's life to help those things start to become more authentic, less cliche, which I think they often become cliche, or things that we write down or the activities we do in a book, and then we just never come back to them, And so this is really vitally important because, we want to have something that's actionable for us to grow as leaders, so that we can be effective in developing the culture.
I love the piece of it where you get into and you start talking about the things that can impact you as a leader. And one of the things that stood out for me as I was going through and I was reading this is I started to look at, okay, what exactly is JP trying to get me to see and understand when I'm reading and trying to learn about who I am and what is important to me? And when I look at that, I start to see you have your mission statement, you have your vision statement, and I think coaches sometimes get those two things confused. So in your mind, tell us the difference between a mission statement and a vision statement, just so people can have a clarification on what exactly those mean.
Yeah, a mission statement is something that you live out every day, and it's one of the biggest requirements is in a mission statement, especially a transformational mission statement of impact, is that you're seeing people as people. You have that outward mindset, right? But it's something you do every day, whereas a vision statement is something you're working towards. It's what you're trying to create. It's someday, not every day.
The other piece of it, I think that's a really good clarification, helps people to understand exactly where you're coming from. I think the other thing that jumped out at me from this section was when you talked about the need for coaches to see themselves not as a coach, but as a mentor. And I think when you do see yourself as a mentor, as you explained, that a mentor takes that relationship one step further and makes the relationship even deeper. And you get involved not just in your player's life as a player, but you're getting involved in your player's life off the court, off the field, and you're really getting to know them and try to figure out what makes them tick and how can you lift them up and make them not just better players, but better people. So why was that such an important part of this section of the book where you talked a lot about, hey, you've got to be a mentor and not just a coach?
And the world's got plenty of coaches. The world's got plenty of them. We just need more mentors. That's what young people need today more than anything out there. And we look at the coaches that really impacted our lives. It wasn't their coaching, it was their mentorship that impacted our lives. So just honestly, it's about like kind of creating a whole new job description for yourself and just starting to see, okay, a lot of times as coaches, I shouldn't have to work with them on this, or I shouldn't have to do this, or, no. like this is now the new job. This is the new, if we want to make an impact. So we're focusing in on those personal relationships. And, the reality is within this, the coach player relationship, we're not going to always reach to what I would say level 3. Level 1 is I'm working with you as an athlete to help you become better at your sport. I would say level 2 is focusing on maybe off the court. Maybe it's I'm really helping support you when it comes to your career, academics. Maybe you want to go into college. Maybe for college at a college level, what do you want to do after that with your career? So that's kind of the next level, is just chopping the pour into our athletes that way. But level 3 is the deepest level. Instead of asking, what do you want to achieve in your sport, level 1 or level 2, we're asking them, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up, or what do you want to do when you get older, or, you're helping to develop them in their career. Level 3 is really about who do you want to become. And that can take on some, like with many of my coaches I support, they have very deep relationships with their athletes, or at least a lot of them. And they're talking about who they want to become, the type of husbands and fathers or mothers and, spouses and friends, and just it's pretty powerful at that. And it's pretty fulfilling for coaches.
And then when you get into the next section of the book and you start talking about the 7 disciplines of a transformational leader, you also talk about the need for coaches themselves to seek out mentors for the same reasons that you just described, right? You're building that relationship with somebody you're trying to grow as a leader, as you're trying to grow your players.
Yeah, this isn't an advertisement for what I do. It's just a reality of that there needs to be more people out there doing what I'm doing. And I think it's great, that you've started, with the Hoops Head. I've seen that you've got that mentorship program. Like, we need more of that, more offerings like that. We need more coaches that are willing to be vulnerable and step into those relationships, because at the end of the day, Mike, like, I get it. Like, some coaches might say, well, I've got some people, that I can talk to. But in my experience, the coaches I work with, which, very few of them ever actually leave our mentorship program, because they recognize the value in it. Like, when you're in leadership, you really can't go to your assistant coaches around a lot of things. Or if you do, they're going to have this limited perspective. They're too emotionally tied to it. And then your spouse, they're still like emotionally invested. They've always, typically got your back. And maybe there's not even that level of maybe experience or knowledge to be able to help us through some of the issues. So it's really powerful to have someone outside of our circumstances that's a little bit less maybe emotionally invested in these things, that can help us to work through a lot of issues, hold us accountable on certain things. As I say, really, mentorship focuses on 3 levels. I'm helping individuals with the things they know to be true. I'm helping them to be confident and convicted in those things as a coach, and have strong self-belief. The things they know they don't know, I'm a guide. I'm helping them to answer questions of things that come up. And at the last level is the things they don't know. They're blind spots. That's where I'm sometimes called to speak into them. So I think that's the power of a mentor, and I really encourage coaches, obviously, to seek those out. And I think there's more people like myself, yourself, that are offering stuff like that.
I think by having a formal mentor, it also makes it easier to be able to go to that person with questions. That's sort of what we found within our program, that when a coach has a question or when a situation arises, when they know they have somebody that they can go to, and maybe that mentor doesn't have the perfect answer, but to be able to have somebody that you can talk it through with, and somebody who's experienced and somebody who can share their perspective, as you said, from an outside viewpoint, and somebody who's not emotionally involved. I think coaches that look and seek out a mentor and have somebody that's in place that they can go to, I think you end up getting much better results than, as you said, when you go to somebody that's close by. Or a lot of times, I think, and this goes for teachers as well, and a lot of coaches we know are teachers, that job can be super isolating, where you feel like you're the only person that's ever experienced these things. And oh my gosh, it's just the weight of the world is bearing down on you. And so often we forget that there's a lot of other people that have experienced the same things that we're experiencing, and we can seek their knowledge and we can use their wisdom to enable us to better handle those situations. I think sometimes as teachers and coaches, we get so caught up in our own small little world that we don't realize that there's this bigger picture. There's this bigger world out there where people have had these similar experiences that they can share and give us a place to be able to interact with someone who's gone through that before.
Well, I absolutely love that. You know, I mean, the whole thing of how the TOC mentorship program came about was not, I sat down and said, oh, this would be, it wasn't like the initial idea. It kind of really birthed out of the idea of just, I kept asking, what do coaches really need? Do they need me to come in and run a workshop? And they do. Like I do that stuff, you know, for coaches that I work with and support. But that's not really what they needed. You know, it wasn't like coming in and running a workshop or giving them and their staff some sort of motivational speech. They needed someone that was kind of walking the road with them. And that's what I needed at my low point. And my investment in a mentorship program and hiring a mentor was the best investment I ever made in my own leadership. And it's coaching for coaches. It's support for coaches. The support that we don't get when we're isolated and we don't know if we can even trust our athletic director, or, you know, we're questioning our staff, or, you know, just to be able to have that. So, and I get it that there's the informal mentors that we have in our lives, and there's values in those people, but to have someone that's consistently checking in on you and making themselves available. And for me, it's just, I try to be an expert in this area of culture. I don't really focus on X's and O's. I haven't for 6 years in basketball, and that's now why I work with people outside of basketball and ice hockey, rugby, American football, soccer, you know, volleyball, you know. But it's just, I just really try to help alleviate too some of the things that coaches, maybe they don't need, you know, they don't have time to read all these books or do all these things. So I just go out there and try to make myself a learner in that area so that I can be the best I can be for them as well too. So
that continued growth as a coach, it's amazing, JP, the number of people that we've talked to on the podcast who are sharing with us just how much time they spend trying to grow and improve themselves. And not just as coaches, when you start thinking about, coaches watch a lot of film and they're trying to figure out X's and O's and scout opponents and recruit and do all the things that coaches have to do, but also just the fact that they're working on themselves and trying to become a better leader. And one of the things that, I guess this will be the last piece before we jump into establishing your culture with your team, but one of the last things that you have in this section of the book is about the stop, start, and keep doing list. So briefly just explain what that is as a tool for coaches in terms of self-improvement.
Yeah, I lay out in the books, I lay out some disciplines that I think are really important for leaders, 7 of them to be exact, you know, and that I think are really, underinvested in. And you can't obviously start doing all 7 tomorrow. And we need a kind of a practical way to start implementing some of these things in our life. And honestly, at the end of the day, your mission, your vision, values, and all those things, like of all the things in part 1, this is the most important piece, is the disciplines. And I always say, look, like John Wooden did not come up with the pyramid of success in his first year as a coach. He didn't come up with it by reading some book, I'll tell you that. Over time, he developed what was called the ladder of success. And then I guess the ladder got too tall and maybe decided to make it into a pyramid. But you know what I mean? It took time to evolve. John Wooden was a continuous learner. He did things. He spent time in solitude. He journaled. He read. He had a learning system for taking notes. He was very intentional in his own growth. So that's what this is about. So find something you need to start doing more of. But to start doing something, if I want to read more, then I have to stop doing something in my life. And I'm really big right now in my own personal growth. I'm obsessed with the things that I got to stop doing that are providing no value for me or other people. And
so what are some of the what's one of those things?
Well, so the question I keep coming back to is this: at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the year, when I look at any activity in my life, checking social media, for instance, watching TV, do I wish I did more of that? That's my first question. And if my answer is like, no, I don't wish I watched more TV. Okay. Now the question is, did I watch the right amount? Or am I watching too much? If I reduced the amount that I watch TV, if I checked social media half as much as I did, would I say, man, I need more of that? No, I really don't think so. And so I continue to reduce my TV time too. I used to watch maybe one show a night. Now it's one show every 2 weeks, maybe. It drives my wife crazy a little bit. So I may have to up it a little bit. But social media, same thing. It's like, I don't know. Some days when I get on there, the value that it's getting, and maybe I should be more active in trying to provide value there as well too. But it's just looking at different things like that, like reading the news. Like I've removed all fast media from my life. If I want to learn about something that's going on in the world, I go pick up a newspaper.
Yep.
Stuff like that. I've just these are things where I constantly, I don't have time for that. Well, no, I do. I just am making a choice to spend time elsewhere. So I'm, like I said, I'm really focused on things to stop doing. I think it's that same concept applies within team culture building, as I know we're going to jump into next. Jim Collins talks about that good to great. The great companies were obsessed with all the things they needed to stop doing. And I love that bit as well too. So if you feel like, I don't have time for these strategies, it's like, no, you do. You could just spend less time, maybe a little less time on the court. Maybe it's a little less time on film. We do have time. It's just about, do we want to make time?
Right. Prioritizing. And I think in a way, charting how you spend your time, both on a personal level and when you start thinking about what you do with your team, and really figuring out, where do I spend my time, taking that inventory. And then you can kind of look at it and go, I know sometimes that my wife and I will ask our kids occasionally, hey, let's look at your screen time on this particular day or this particular week. And then we'll look at theirs, and then we'll look at ours. And more often than not, we're surprised by the amount of time. We're like, whoa, that's a lot of time. And you start thinking about it and you say, boy, how could I be more effective with what I do? And how much time am I wasting on these little things that, yeah, maybe they're entertaining in the moment, or maybe they serve some small need in the moment. But as you said, if you really look back on it, you're like, what am I getting out of this? And how could I be using my time more productively? So once you have yourself squared away as a leader, and like I said, I love that section of the book, just because when I go through and I look at that, when I read something like this, it always makes me stop and think and sort of take that assessment of myself. Hey, where am I in terms of my ability to be ready to be the best leader that I can be? And inevitably, I look at something like, when you're going through, one of your disciplines is to get more sleep. And that's probably an area that I think most people in my life who know me would say, yeah, Mike probably needs to do a much better job on getting more sleep. And as you try to do things, and you're trying to be a parent, you're trying to do a podcast, you're trying to have a full-time job, and you're trying to do all the things that I do, it's just sometimes that sleep gets away from you, and then you have to reset yourself and say, hey, what am I prioritizing, and what am I doing to my both short-term and long-term health? So anyway, once you have yourself squared away as a leader, then the next step is, okay, how do we establish a team culture? And the first section that you have is one that really leaped out at me, and you referenced it earlier when you talked about the Navy captain who ended up changing around what was previously the worst ship in the Navy and making it the best ship in the Navy. And basically, you were talking about the onboarding process. What is a player's first day on the team like? So just talk about why that's so important in establishing your culture when you're trying to get this process going as a coach.
Yeah. The thing about, this onboarding experience, or someone's first day, or if you've been coaching in a place for a long time and it's, the new season, you want it to feel different. If you're trying to make a cultural change, if you're trying to take your culture from good to great, or you're trying to take it from bad to good, you want it to feel different. There's a great book out there by the Heath brothers called The Power of Moments. And they talk about that, of just like these we don't remember like the average of our experience. We remember certain events, that first day, last day, last game, just different things like that. So it's about being really intentional to, whether it's new players or even just, old players returning, to take time to make sure that they always understand your culture and your values and your standards, but more so that they feel connected. And the two big ways to do that is, one is through one-on-ones with every new player or every player at the start of a new season. And, Abrashoff was super intentional in that. He would bring up the sailors up to his office. He'd sit them down. Well, they would first walk around his office. He did this with 310 sailors when he took over the Benfold. 310 sailors in 6 weeks at 30 minutes a meeting. You do the math. And I have coaches that say they don't have time for one-on-ones with every player once a month. Here Abrashoff made the time. And he would share about his life. He'd ask about their life, and then he would ask questions around, what they wanted this experience to be like, and what changes they thought they could make in the ship, that would help improve it. So just to start to already empower his sailors, he did that. And then also that he designed an onboarding program where, kind of like a buddy system. I mean, I think it's very popular to have a buddy or a big brother, big sister program. The buddy system, like my wife works at Google, they have that. It's, she thought it was phenomenal when she got onboarded there 3 years ago, to have someone that just really spends the first 6 months with her, helping her to understand things, being that place to answer questions. For coaches, this is like just getting the veteran players, to send a text message or Snapchat to a player, a week before, or the week leading up to the first practice, and just saying, hey, we can't wait to have you. And then when that player walks through the door, they're taking them on a tour of campus, or they're just partnering up with them and saying, hey, come get some shots up with me, and there's just someone looking out for them right away, and then introducing them to other people. And that vastly changes the experience for new athletes and gets them excited about and feeling connected. And that's as Coyle talks about in his book, The Culture Code, that's one of the foundations to a great culture is connection.
Yeah, I think being able to make sure that the first experience that a player has is one that's welcoming and is one that they remember, sets the tone for everything else that you're going to lay out over the course of the book and everything else that you want to do when you're building a culture. Another thing that stood out from this section of the book to me was the player improvement plans. And as a way to, one, help the players to improve themselves, and then two, also to help the players to understand that the coach was bought into helping the player to be the best player they could be, but also the best person that they could be. So talk a little bit about your experience with player improvement plans and why that's such an important part of establishing a great culture.
They've really become, for most of our teams that I've worked with, they've become so impactful. I can't, it does take time. It takes effort, but it's so impactful, and it addresses so many challenges and issues. I can't recommend this one enough. So we talk about in the book, there's team standards or standards across the team that, you might sit down with your players and do. There's the coach standards, the ones that your non-negotiables. We might set 3 or 4 of those. But there's also like the player standards, right? So the idea is just asking what's important to each athlete and understanding what's important to them, their goals, their aspirations, and then saying, okay, if this is, you want to play college basketball, where are you currently in relation to that goal? So where do you want to go? Where are you currently? And there's this gap. There's this gap from where they are to where they want to be. So, okay, so how are you going to close that gap? What are you going to do? What do you need to do? And then how can I help you in that? And that's really what kind of goes in the player improvement plan. And you can identify areas around athleticism, technical skills, tactical skills, character type skills, ways that they can contribute to the culture and team. There's many categories you can have on there that they need to grow in, they need to improve on, or strengths that they need to continue to build on. But then you're really trying to get to some actionable commitments, and implementation intentions, as the research would show, where you say, hey, I'm going to do this at this time, this many times a week, or whatever it is, right? Really clear commitments, becomes hugely impactful to have that. So you're helping to train them to not only set goals, like it's even bigger than setting goals, like to understand what's most important to them, but what they need to do to work towards it. And then you're entering into this agreement where you're like, hey, can I support you in that? How can I do that? You want reminders when you start slipping, when you start falling into old behaviors, when you start complaining or, different things like that. Like, can I step in and help you? And it changes the relationship. This is where you move from a coach to a mentor in these conversations. The cool thing is we've made this super simple for our coaches where some of them use a notebook, but most of our use actually Google Docs, and we link it with this spreadsheet. And the cool thing there is the coaches are sharing the Google Doc with the player, and at a high school level, and even college level, with the parent. And on that, it's like, all parents are like, oh my gosh, coaches actually once a month, one of the coaches on staff is sitting down with my son or daughter, and they have a plan. They care about that. And they also have communicated here what their role is. So that's one of the biggest complaints is a lack of transparency around roles that we see the last few years. We're not getting that anymore with the teams that I work with. That was a factor for years. Now with player improvement plans, there's no lack of transparency because it's written out. This is exactly where they are currently in the rotation. So it addresses a lot of issues. And the best thing is it just helps the player feel valued.
One of the things that I think is a theme that runs through the book is when you put something down on paper, when you talk about it as a team, when you talk about it as a coach-player relationship, and you have things that you agree upon in advance. This is who we want to be. This is how we're going to get there. This is what we're all about. This is the behavior that we expect to see. Then when those things are not being seen, it's easy for everybody to go back and say, hey, didn't we agree to this, whether it's as a team or as an individual, or hey, are we doing the things that we said needed to be done in order to get where we want it to go, or in order to be who we want to be as a team or as an individual? It feels like there's a lot of that when you talk about building a great culture. You're talking about making sure everybody understands the expectations, and then because you've talked about it in advance, you now can then hold people accountable to those expectations.
I'm going to give a parenting example, and I apologize if this falls short, but, I've got a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old almost. And my 6 and 5-year-old today were at a friend's house. And if you've parented this age, like they go to a friend's house, it's really hard to get them out of the house. They don't want to come home with you. And it's this constant battle we would go through with our kids. And it's amazing just even if I'm able to say, hey, all right, now you're getting to go to a friend's house, special opportunity, privilege. When I come to pick you up, I just said, when I come in and I say it's time to go, what's going to happen? We're going to go. I'm like, all right, now, what do you think if you don't and you run upstairs and try to hide from me like you did last time, what do you think would be a good consequence? And they're like, and I was like, oh, probably not get to go back. I was like, yeah. And I think it'd be great for you to go back. So then I show up today to pick them up. I'm like, it's time to go. They look at me, nod their head, and walk out the door. That was it. Now
right.
I've, just by pre-agreeing to that, you're priming people's minds. And it's the same within your team. It's not always going to be easy, but it's hey, we said this, this is what we need to do to be successful. Has that changed? And your players will, no, they'll give you the nod. And I think that's what the cool thing about the player improvement plans is those players that struggle emotionally. I think a lot of times, if they're bought in a calm moment, where their emotions aren't high and we're not in the heat of the game, if they're bought in there and they've agreed to you being able to step in and help them, that's a game changer. But we've got to first get them to buy in a non-emotional moment. And that's where the power of one-on-ones is that you're helping them to agree to certain behaviors and your ability to step in and call them up.
Yeah, I think, again, by doing the prep work, you make the work later on much, much easier, as opposed to you springing on somebody, hey, we have no recollection that we ever talked about this. There's nothing there. And suddenly you're asking them to do something. No, we've talked about this in advance in, as you said, a non-emotional state. And now when you get to a point where, hey, we got to really call somebody up on this, we got to make sure that we're doing the things that we talked about, it becomes so much easier when you've done that prep work. And that's how you really establish the culture, is get people to agree, and then you hold them to that degree of accountability. So the next section of the book, you start talking about, once we've established the culture, how do we support that culture once we have it established? And I want to hit on two different sections here that kind of jumped out at me. One, team culture days. I know this is something that people talk about a lot, is how do we build a culture with our team? How do we make sure that we're supporting what it is that we do? So talk a little bit about team culture days and what they should be all about and what they should accomplish.
Yeah, I've given some, I think they're vastly different approaches to team culture days, or whatever people might call like team building events, right? Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that, I really hit on and share the story of Greg Tonagel at Indiana Wesleyan and how he takes his team to the Dominican Republic every 2 years. And they go out there and they're essentially in brutal heat, helping communities rebuild, building bridges, impacting lives. And then after a day, a 10-hour day in the sun, then they're going and playing basketball games in the evening. And the concept is not everybody's going to go to the Dominican Republic, but it's the idea of like how other coaches that I've worked with, one of the most impactful things you can do is go and do community service together. Community service where you're getting your hands dirty, or community service where you're really engaging with people. And the beautiful thing there is, I think we talk a lot about, we want the entitlement, our kids that are not grateful. They're ungrateful today. And service and helping others is one of the best ways to reframe and help us to be grateful for what we have. And so that's it's a simple thing to do. It obviously improves and looks good for your program, but it's more importantly, and you're helping people, but it's also like really impactful for your athletes to do that. So, that's one of my favorites is the, I talk about in the book, is the community service and going and serving, going and helping others. But there's also, I think other things that people shy away from today, like doing really hard things together, like really physically exhausting training, boot camps, hell weeks, whatever you want to call it. Tonagel calls it junkyard workouts, and they do 4 of them, I think, in September, and 1 in the midnight in June. And it's just, it could be military type stuff. I think we've moved in the last 20 years to everything's going to be very sports specific training. I think I agree. I think, I grew up as a high school athlete, we would run every day like 4 or 5 miles jogging. And it was like, well, that's not really important. But man, growing up in South Carolina, and there was still some value in us getting out there and running as a team. It didn't need to be 3 days a week, but having to do these long runs in the South Carolina heat together, it built certain things within us. And it doesn't have to necessarily always be sports specific. So designing some of these really hard workouts to do and pushing people out of their comfort zones and creating shared suffering where if we're going to complete this task, we got to do it together, and I'm going to lean on you, or I'm struggling with to do this many push-ups, and this other teammate steps in and helps me. That creates shared vulnerability and connection, and it's powerful. It's very powerful, and you help people to realize when they're going to this point of I can't do any more, that they can do more. And that's really, I think, great team building, but also mental toughness training.
And I think it's interesting, just the perspective that you just brought with those two ideas, where you have community service and then you have doing something extremely difficult together. Because a lot of times I think when people hear team building, they think something fun. They think like the coaches versus players wiffle ball game, or they think, hey, we're all going to go bowling, and that's the only way that you can have these team culture days. So I like the idea here that you bring to the table, where it's not just necessarily, hey, let's just have some fun and all hang out together. Hopefully those things are happening too. But I think here you've given two very distinct ways that coaches can put their athletes in a position where they have to come together, one for the greater good of someone else. And then in the process of doing that, they're also bonding together. But then you also have this shared difficult task where, hey, we're all sweating through this together. And when we come out on the other side, we're going to be closer for having gone through the experience.
Yeah. And it's cheaper than paintballing, I'll tell you that.
That's true. There's no doubt about that. There's no question about that. Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional, membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more. All right, the next one that jumped out at me in this section was the issues list. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me here is that as my kids have gotten older, and I haven't just looked at things from a coaching perspective, because as a young coach, when I didn't have kids, and then when my kids were very young and they weren't involved in team sports, you tended to see everything from either what you could recollect from your own playing experiences or from your experiences as a coach. And now that I see it from the other side as the parent of an athlete, I'll have my son come home and he'll mention something that he sees, that's something that's going on in the locker room or things that kids are talking about that are, I think, issues for his team and I'm sure his coaching staff. But in a lot of ways, the coach may not even be aware of some of the issues that my son is bringing to me as a parent that are not bubbling up to the coach's attention. And maybe a lot of them are minor things, small things, but they're things that I think if a coach knew, they'd want to try to start to address. And oftentimes, as we know, small things can turn into big things. So just talk about how important it is for a coach to be able to bring issues within the team to light so that then they can be handled and dealt with in the proper way so you can continue to build the right culture and not have it kind of be destroyed by issues that could come up over the course of a season or throughout the year.
So this is how the system is works to support itself, because if you haven't created relationships and started to build safety, and you haven't empowered people through something like a captain's or a leadership council, then A, you don't have a place for people safe to speak up, or you don't really have processes in place to get people to speak up. So by having captains and units like we talk about in one of the chapters, you're getting people to check in with everybody to find issues, to bring them to the surface. And there's incredible value in just getting things out there quickly. And so as a coach, you have to create that culture where people feel safe to speak up. And then you have things in place where the issues are brought up to the table, but then we don't dwell on the issues. We just get very quickly focused on solutions. And it's a powerful thing to sit down with, elected leaders of your team each week and say, hey, you checked in with the guys in your units. That means every guy was checked in on the whole team. What issues do we got here? And whether it's a playing time issue or, like in the show Ted Lasso, there's an issue with the shower. He has an issues box there, a suggestions box because the shower sucks. It's like big or small. Practices are running too late. We're tired. Whatever it be. Or some off-court drama between two people. Okay, how can we work through this? This is really empowering for the athletes. And when your team sees that you value and issues come up and you address them right away, you gain credibility and respect very quickly. Very quickly. When issues are brought to the table and they are not addressed, and it doesn't mean that they always be fixed, but you're not already putting in action some sort of solutions. It may not be the solution that works, but if you fail to do that, you lose credibility very quickly. Very quickly. And I know this from experience. Just even my wife, she used to work within Amazon and just she saw the leaders in these fulfillment centers that would be successful were the ones that listened to employee concerns and addressed them right away. And the ones that ignored them quickly lost respect. And so creating an issues list is one thing, but then helping others and also being a part of a solutions-based process is critical.
It just seems like when you put that in place and you bring issues to light, no matter whether they're big or small, and as you said, you jump on them right away and you make sure, hey, look, you may not be able to solve every single issue to the satisfaction of every single person involved, but when your team knows that something has come up that is of concern to one or more individuals on the team and it's going to potentially impact the team's performance, and you get on that right away and you address it, yeah, I can see the power in that, because you know that little fires aren't going to turn into big fires. And we all know that with teams, oftentimes that's what happens. Something starts small and people look the other way. They look the other way. And before you know it, what could have been a problem that could have easily been contained has now become a much, much bigger problem. It's infected more people. And then consequently, it's had a negative effect on the team. So just getting those issues out. And then I think the second step, which you really talked about and hit hard, is you've got to do something about it. It's not enough to just have it be, okay, I know what the issues are. Now I've actually got to take some action and do something so that everyone can see that, hey, we're going to take care of this and try to get it back on the right track so that we can get the culture and keep the culture where we want it and not just have it try to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, it's conflict is good within cultures when it's task conflict and you're trying to get things that are task conflict out there quickly so before they become relational, or if relational conflict comes up, you address it. In the book, I shared a story of Toyota and how they address issues within their factory production, which is the cord. There's a cord along the assembly line that employees could pull at any stage to stop production. And the idea being, we have an issue. We have to address this issue before we continue to put cars out. And sometimes the solution doesn't work. But the employee might suggest some sort of solution. They implement it. It doesn't work. But then another employee comes along and helps to address the solution. It's really cool how they've done that over the years, and why most people love their Toyotas, because they're really dependable. It's the same within the culture here. It's just finding some sort of cord that people can pull. And for that, sometimes it is, the Ted Lasso suggestion box in the office. Sometimes it's a digital Google form link that's included in a lot of your messages to your players of, hey, if you've seen any issues come up, you can drop it in anonymously or put your name on it. Just what's an issue here that you'd like for our leadership council or our coaching staff to discuss at our next meeting. So that's just some simple ways that we've seen coaches get those issues to the front.
And then you go on to talk a little bit about communication, which we know that it's so important for coaches to be able to understand how to talk to athletes. One of the things that I've talked to a ton of people on the podcast about, JP, is just how powerful what we say as coaches can be for athletes, and that things that we say, good or bad, can be things that we probably don't even remember saying, but our athletes still remember them 20, 30, 40 years later. Just like I'm sure there are things that you remember that a coach said to you at some point in your athletic career. I know there are things that coaches said to me that I remember, and I'm sure if I went back and talked to those coaches, they would have no recollection of having ever said those things to me. But you talk about how to communicate, and just there's a whole bunch of different things in terms of how you provide feedback, but I want to focus on the acronym EARN. Just tell us a little bit about what that acronym stands for, and then just explain each one of those little parts of the acronym EARN.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, our communication, we got to be intentional, because it's not about what we intend to say, it's the message they hear. It's not about what we intend to say, it's the message they actually hear. And we have to take responsibility for that. And a lot of times we might, as coaches, say, well, that's not what I intended to say, them to hear, or that's not what my intention. But that's what they heard. But I also think there's just so much research around communication, effective feedback, ineffective feedback, effective encouragement, effective praise, ineffective praise. And as leaders, we got to be intentional about that, but we can also teach it to our team. And that's what EARN is about. EARN has evolved over the years through my research. It actually used to be ERN. And then 2 years ago, we made it EARN because we really started to come across more research. Essentially, the E stands for encouragement, which I think most people know. It's injecting energy. It's positive things before the action, before the event. So, you're a loud bench, you're cheering people on, you're saying, come on, Mike, you got this, let's go, heads up. You're encouraging things there. The A stands for affirmation, and we like to teach coaches, and we like to have coaches teach their players the difference between affirmation and praise. Extensive research on the impact of affirmation. You're focusing on the behaviors, so it reinforces behaviors, whereas praise, you're focused on the outcomes. Oh, you made the shot, good shot, and that actually only adds more pressure. So praise can actually become harmful. And I go to watch practices, and I'm guilty of it myself. I listen to myself in practice. The amount of times I say good job, and it's just most of the time they ignore it. But then even then, it doesn't do anything, or it hurts. So we talk about affirmation, which is focusing on the behaviors. That's positive after the behavior, or after the action, or positive after the event. Then there's neutral before the event, which is a reminder. And I think we know what reminders are. I love PGC basketball talk around reminders. I think a lot of times our communication, though, is not effective reminders. Like, we're always like, ball help deny in basketball. It's like, is that really what I need to be reminded of? Like, that I've got the ball here, and maybe it is. But also, I might, if I'm out on defense and I really struggle to remember to force them to the baseline, I might need a teammate, hey, baseline, force a baseline, or shooter. Like, we want intelligent reminders. Oh, he's a shooter, watch the shooter. Like, those are things we want to be communicating. So you really start to lay out with your team, okay, what do we need to be reminded of? And you'll see sometimes guys need to be reminded of, like, head up after that shot, and have a teammate remind them of that. That's pretty powerful. And lastly is notifications. And this is a term I stole from Daniel Coyle in his book, Culture Code, where he talked about pilots, and they use something called notifications. And whether it's normal routine flight or they are going down for a crash landing here, notifications is the way they approach their communication, which is just observing what's going on in the cockpit and with the plane and stating that. And that's what you're trying to do in feedback. Effective feedback, the research would show, you have to be direct, but make sure in your tone and your body language, it's not judgmental. So, like, if player's not sprinting back on defense, you don't want the tone or the words to say you're lazy, quit being lazy, get back on defense. You want the tone, the body language, and the words to say what you saw. You didn't sprint back on defense. They scored another basket. That's it. Now, that's feedback. It's direct, but I'm not introducing a lot of judgment. So that's what we try to focus on, was teaching our players and our coaches that, and then developing that throughout the practice. And so I talk a little bit about how to implement that within a team. And you start a drill. It's like, hey, what are some good reminders in this drill? Like what do you be reminded of? And a lot of times we use like success criteria around that, is our term or emphasis, but you just really try to train communication, because I think that's something that has to be developed.
And part of that, right, is thinking about it beforehand when you're talking about putting together a practice or thinking about the drill or going into games and what's going to be important. You think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. Again, just like you mentioned before, prior to getting into an emotional state where you may end up saying things that aren't as beneficial, that aren't as helpful to your athletes to try to improve their performance. I think that prep work, again, is key when it comes to effective communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's even looking at your practice plan before you get out there and saying, hey, what do I really want to teach my players to communicate in this drill? Not just communication is the emphasis. It's what are we trying to communicate?
Absolutely. All right, part 4 of the book, Enforcing Culture. One of the things that you have in here that I think it's sort of been what we've been talking about all throughout this whole time, but you talk about celebrating behaviors. And I think it's really important to make sure that coaches understand that when you have your standards and you have your non-negotiables, you have to be able to attach actual behaviors to those things. Otherwise, they just kind of become a poster on the wall, where we have to really be able to identify, okay, what behaviors are we looking for that we can celebrate, that reinforce our team culture? So just maybe give us an example of 2 of what that means to be able to celebrate behaviors.
Yeah, it's kind of the reinforcement of the culture is what I call it in this chapter in many ways. So you're reinforcing those behavioral standards in a way that's positive. 2 big things are like creating a cultural language, where, it's a phrase says a lot, and it could be sweep the sheds, carry the water, leave it better than we found it. It's just constantly having some of those mantras that reinforce those behaviors so it becomes easy to communicate and remember for everyone. But I also think it's about finding ways to celebrate. And there's 2 ways I talk about that in the book. Well, there's a lot of ways, but 2 of my favorite are, one is just stopping and calling out when you see it in a positive. And I love this in Anson Dorrance at North Carolina for his soccer team. He's one of his core values is to compete. I mean, he's all about competing. He's got the competitive cauldron, which is a reinforcement of that. A lot of our teams use a competitive cauldron as well within their practice. But like if a players collide, instead of running in going, oh, everybody okay? He's like, yeah, awesome. Love that. And you're like, oh, way to go, Ashley. That's what we need more of right there. And a lot of times maybe other coaches wouldn't jump in there and they'd be more concerned with maybe safety and stuff, but he's just constantly trying to reinforce the competitive fire and these competitive practices. So it's just stopping practice, not just when things go wrong, but stopping practice when players nail it, right? The other thing is, and I love this one, and it's something simple, but is, hey, right, get a Gatorade or something that you just give out after practice, but say, you give it to one of the players and say, hey, Mike, who do you think best represented our value of competitiveness today? Who is the best competitor out here today? And then a player has to give it to somebody else. Or maybe you go to one of your captains and say, hey, it's, this captain's day today to acknowledge the competitor, or this captain's someone that's been really selfless. Now, what happens here is all of a sudden when Mike gives it to Joe, this Gatorade says, well, he's been really selfless because, he lost his starting spot, but he was still cheering everybody on last week, and it was just phenomenal to see that. It's not like he's the teacher's pet now, Joe. He doesn't feel that. The peer affirmation is probably even more important than the coach affirmation. The coach affirmation is typically done best in one-on-ones. This is huge. And there's a lot of research that would show that the peer bonus is essentially what you'd say in a corporate world. That's incredible because it doesn't just benefit the receiver. And I talk about this in the book. My wife has this at Google. They do peer spot bonuses where the Google gives them money, to give to each other on the team and other teams. And my wife talks about how much I gave so-and-so a spot bonus today. And just it feels good for the giver.
Right,
to
absolutely.
Give the bonus. And it's like, it felt good to let them know how much I appreciate their help on this project. It's the same thing here in the team, So Mike gives the Gatorade to Joe, lets him know that. All of a sudden Mike feels like, and then all of a sudden everyone hears like, you're coming back to your core values. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of peers recognizing peers. I think that's definitely can be more powerful than the coach recognizing somebody. Not that coaches can't recognize in the same way, but certainly that peer-to-peer recognition, one, as you said, it recognizes the individual who's receiving, but also the giver feels good about it. And also it forces them to think about, hey, what is somebody out there doing to support the culture? And I would have to guess that has an internal impact on them of, hey, tomorrow it could be somebody giving out the Gatorade for something else, and maybe it's something that I can get, or maybe it's something that I can do. And so looking around for more opportunities to be able to support the culture and be able to exhibit the type of behaviors that are going to lift the team and really support what the coach and what the culture is trying to build. Next part of enforcing the culture, you talk about 3 different types of consequences. And I know you can go into lots of detail on each one of those, but maybe if you can just give us a quick synopsis on the 3 different types of consequences that you talk about in the book: natural, progressive, and restorative.
Yeah, it's a vastly different approach to discipline within a team than I think we've used as coaches. Natural consequences are things that would naturally occur. For instance, if players are supposed to put their dirty jerseys into the washing machine after practice, if they didn't do that, then they might have a wet jersey to wear the next day. So allowing them to experience the wet jersey helps to motivate them to do the job, to put it in the washing machine, right? That's one aspect of it. But the other natural consequence is failing to work hard. And on a Thursday's practice, we go into Friday's practice and we're not as prepared and we don't play as well. So sometimes you allow them to experience the natural consequences, but sometimes you just talk about the natural consequences. Guys, if we continue to give this type of effort, what's going to happen tomorrow in tomorrow's game? And just having them name those things, and discussing, that's what you're really doing in establishing the culture, is you're saying, hey, what's our goal? What do we need to do? If we don't do those things, what's going to happen? Well, we're probably not going to become conference champions this year. So it helps to reinforce motivation around the behavior. So there's sometimes allowing them, sometimes it's discussing and it helps motivate the desire to meet the standard. Progressive consequences are largely logical consequences that are delivered in a way that makes sense for the athlete, reinforce some cultural values. So when a player's not working hard, has a bad attitude, they're whatever it is in practice, or in a game, and we give them some reminders, we might get on them, come on, man, you got to start working hard, like da-da-da-da. Eventually, we either continue to tolerate the behavior, or traditionally we make them run, or we kick them out of practice, right? And what we're trying to do with progressive consequences is not go to DEFCON 5 and kick them out of practice right away. It's more like, okay, you're not working hard. I'm not going to run you because that's something that's good for you. And, sometimes we use that phrase, it's a get to, not a got to. Well, that's great to say that, but do you really reinforce that? And you can reinforce that through a progressive consequence. So they're not working hard in the drill. You might say, let's, they do a rep. Let's try that again. And this time, let's go with the effort I know you're capable of. So it's a do-over. You might reset the whole team. All right, we're going to go back to the start. We've been doing this drill for 3 minutes. We're going to go back and we're going to do it for 5 minutes, but we're going to do it for 5 minutes at a high level that I know you're capable of doing it. So we're going to restart the clock here. The other next step in the progression would be, you know what? You're not working hard, Mike. Why don't you just step out of the drill and you can hop in the next drill. Okay, so you've just lost the opportunity to get better in that drill. So you're just reinforcing that, enforcing the consequence in that way. Mike still struggles. You might say, Mike, you know what? Just hang on the sideline. And as soon as you're ready to start working hard or start having the attitude that I know you're capable of, you can hop back in. It's an empowering way. It's reminding them that you have a choice and you can take back, and this taps into intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is around autonomy and also reinforcing competency would be two of the biggest drivers of that. So you're allowing players to still feel that they have a choice, they have autonomy in the situation, but also you're reinforcing the idea of this drill is supposed to help you to become the player you want to be, the competency that you want to develop at your sport. So by doing these things, eventually we've had coaches that said that to say, you know what, Mike, you're not feeling it today. We'll see you tomorrow, or just hop out there and, you've lost the opportunity to get better today. So you've progressed and you haven't gone to that stage without having already, but you rarely get to that when you do all these other progressions. Lastly is the natural consequences. And And not everything can be solved with this progressive logical consequence. A player shows up late to the bus, one of your non-negotiables is be on time. Do you leave without them? Do you go to the game without them? Maybe. Wooden might have left. But I personally wouldn't leave, especially if they're my best player. And I need them to win the game. That's just the truth and the reality of the situation. And so what do we do? Well, we think about something that's creative. So first off, restorative is like, well, what's here? His trust has been broken. It affects the team. Other people feel like there's a double standard. So there's some consequence. Do we just make them run a bunch? No. So for a player late to the bus, they might have to be early every practice, every game the next week, the first person at the gym, and the next bus trip, they bring donuts. Everyone now loves it. He has to get donuts. They get donuts. Everyone's happy. Something like that is fun. Things like that. I had a coach who ran into a situation last year where the assistant coach and the player got into it in a game. Player started talking back. The assistant coach lost his cool. Assistant coach was like, let's run them, And the coach's like, no, there's been a rupture in that relationship. So what can you do to help fix that relationship? You're the adult here. You don't have to say what he did was acceptable, but, how can you help relationships? So the coach actually took that player to lunch. The coach asked the player the same thing. Hey, you weren't really respectful to coach. What can you do to make it up for coach? And I don't know why they ended up came up with this one. Maybe the state of the coach's car was horrible, but the player washed his car, which I thought was funny. But it was like, what way to make it up for his coach, And it's like, well, the cool thing is they end up leaving. Maybe, it would have felt better in the moment for the coach to have that player running, but at the end of the day, it felt better long term for both of them because they were able to spend time together and repair that relationship. And that's what restorative consequences are about. They're about repairing the rupture that has happened within the team.
Well, and you don't have that animosity and that resentment that can be created, right? So you had a situation where these two individuals had a disagreement and obviously escalated to the point where they're arguing in a game. And if you punish them and the coach is on the sideline standing and has the stopwatch out and is timing the kid as they're running, there's not good feelings for either one of those people as that punishment is going on. The player certainly isn't enjoying that. And the coach, maybe you're getting some small, slight sick satisfaction out of watching the player run and struggle. But ultimately, you're not, as you said, you're not repairing the relationship. And ultimately, what's best for the player, the coach, and the team is that the relationship is repaired, improved, so that in the long term, that doesn't happen again. Whereas you can see where the running is just going to create more resentment and more of a divide between the player and coach as opposed to bridging that gap and bringing them together.
Yeah, and all this stuff, I didn't just come up with it like these terms and these things. I've relied on a lot of the behavioral science, and I study a lot about parenting and discipline in the classroom and parenting, because I don't feel comfortable with my natural approach to parenting discipline, which is to make them feel bad for something that they've done. And a person I absolutely love is Dr. Jane Nelson, who's the author of Positive Discipline and 20 books on positive discipline. And she always says this thing around where did we ever get this crazy idea that we had to make people feel bad to do good? Where did we ever get the idea that we had to make people feel bad to do good? And I always resonated with that. Why do I have to, if I could just bring awareness to the behavior, what you're doing there, that's unacceptable. That's not meeting our standard. That individual typically feels bad already. I don't need to rub salt in the wounds and yell and scream. It's just hey man, you're not meeting the standard. And you just bring a level of awareness to that. And really what we want players that are aware of how their behaviors are affecting others. That's what we want. And then for them to say, okay, I'm going to make a different decision now. And that's where you build character. But if we are constantly using fear, punishment to discipline, then all of a sudden people start to do the things that we want them to do because we have told them to do it, and they're afraid if they don't do it, there's going to be this consequence. They leave our program, then where are they in life? We want them to leave our program and be internally motivated to be selfless, to be grateful, to work hard, because they know that those things are who they want to be, and it's going to help them to get where they want to go. And that's the end of the day what this consequence approach is about. This is where character is developed. It's not in a classroom session. It's not in a lecture. It's not in you telling them how they need to be more grateful, or like, this is where character is developed. Reps where we can't, I think about the weight room. It's that, man, this is a hard rep, or maybe if you don't get the rep, you fall short, that's lifting the bar on the bench press. Like, that's where you strengthen the muscles there. Only when it comes to character, it's sometimes there's some failure. Sometimes it's just a lot of resistance, and you have to help them get that bar up, when on some of these reps here, as far as character and their way they respond to mistakes or whatever it is. Like, this is where character development happens.
That's a great point, that it's doing it in practice, and not in practice like a basketball practice, but in actual practice of, hey, I've got to make sure that in this situation that we're handling it in such a way that there's an actual life lesson learned. There's an actual benefit to going through the situation long term, that when that player leaves the program, that lesson's been internalized and is going to make them a better person outside the confines of our basketball program or our soccer program or whatever it might be. And I think that's a powerful lesson, a powerful message that you can send by going through the process of using those different types of consequences that you just described and talked about. The very last section of your book, JP, Fight for Your Culture, there's 3 little subheadings that to me kind of all run together in a way. So I'm going to just read those 3 subheadings and then just share something that was once shared with me, and then I'll let you expound on that. But the 3 subheadings that caught my eye there: 1, don't seek their approval; 2, know when to take a stand; and then 3, know what's worth being fired for. And I think all 3 of those to me tie into this same idea, which I once had a coach tell me, that when you go and you coach and you do a great job as a coach, there's always going to be people that are going to disagree with decisions that you make, because there's going to be kids who aren't going to play as much as they think they should play. There are going to be kids who don't get as many shots as they think they should get, or families or parents who think that their kids are somehow getting shortchanged, or whatever the case may be. And the point that this coach made to me was, when you're a head coach, what you have to do is you have to coach the way that you believe is the right way to coach, so that when you lay down at night and put your head on the pillow, that you know you've done things the best way that you possibly can, and you've done them in the way that you believe is the best for you, your kids, and your program. And to me, all 3 of those subheadings kind of speak to that. So just maybe summarize that last section of Fight for Your Culture and just what those subheadings meant to you as we finish up here with the book.
Yeah, there's one subheading before that where I talk about, you got to be open to feedback and to criticism, and that's where some of my best growth has happened. But we can't, and you're talking about these issues, and we're talking about these things in this culture system about essentially changes that we would make in our leadership. And I think sometimes when we start to make these changes, there's sometimes resistance to new ways of doing things, and we've got to have some self-belief when we're doing it. We've got to have some conviction when we're doing it. Like, this isn't a soft approach to coaching. And I really hope when people listen to this, like, they really understood the consequences piece. That's really hard. It's really hard to ask a kid to step out of a drill rather than just the traditional, hit the line, let's go. Like put them on the line and run them. Like, this is harder. This feels harder as a coach. It feels harder for the players. But it's a better way. I'm not saying the way that we used to do is a bad way. I'm just saying this is a better way. This is the best way that I know how. So when you start to face the resistance, whether it's parents or maybe a certain player or maybe your AD is questioning that, or you're not getting the results that you want right away, you're not winning, you've got to just be convicted as a coach, and you got to have a level of self-belief. And that's why it kind of comes all the way back to the beginning of the personal disciplines, is making sure you have the right people around you and you've got the right things that can help you to stay grounded in what you believe and know so that you can stay the course. I think that's what it's really about, because as I share in the book, it's not going to always go according to plan. Things
Absolutely.
will go through some tough times, but that's where the great cultures come out of. That's where the great leaders emerge from. It's not the companies that, had this plan, put the plan in action, and they were successful. They experienced large amounts of turmoil. They experienced resistance. They experienced recessions in these companies. People trying to buy them out, like these type of things. And they were able to weather those storms and grow through them. And I think that's the same as for teams, is you're going to experience turbulence, and it's about you as the leader helping to right that ship. Sometimes the passengers will know the turbulence was there. Sometimes they won't, even because you've kept it heading in where it needs to go.
Yeah, it's well said. And I think, again, you have to, in the course of doing what you believe, I think the piece that maybe I left out is you have to continue to grow, right? And you have to be open to suggestion. You have to continue to grow and evolve as a coach and look at what are the newest practices, what are some things that I can incorporate as I continue to have that growth mindset and look and learn and have mentors and grow as a coach. And I think your book does just an outstanding job, JP, of laying out how coaches can build the type of culture that not only enables them to win on the floor, but more importantly, enables them to win the process of building a great team. And in the process of doing that, building great individuals who not only are going to have success within the confines of their basketball program, but are also going to be able to go out into society and be tremendous fathers, mothers, daughters, friends. And really, that's what it's all about when we come down to the bottom line of coaching, is we want to have an impact on the young people that are in front of us and be able to do that by using whatever sport it is that we're coaching, the sport that we love, to be able to use that to have an impact on young people. And I think your book does a tremendous job of laying out how coaches can go about doing that. So before we wrap up, please share how people can find out more about you, find out more about Thrive on Challenge, where they can get the book. And after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, you can go over to tocculture.com. If you subscribe to our newsletter there, you'll get a free chapter of the book. You go over to myculturesystem.com. It's got links all across the world for purchasing off Amazon, the book. And it's on ebook and paperback, and it should be in middle of August on Audible as well. So we'll have the audiobook released as well. So you can go over to Amazon too and just check it out, The Culture System. And as I shared, I'm not very active on social media, but you could follow me on Twitter, and occasionally I drop some stuff there as well too. So
JP, cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule to jump on and share your book with us. I appreciate you sending me an advance copy so that I could read it in preparation for our episode tonight. Like I said, it is extremely well done. I would highly recommend any coach at any level, any sport, if you go out and you pick up The Culture System, you're going to read through it, and it's going to inspire you to want to create the kind of culture that JP describes in the book. So please go check it out, pick up a copy. And JP, again, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us tonight. Really appreciate it. Time number 3. I'm sure we're not done. I'm sure you'll be back again. But again, thank you. And to everyone out there, appreciate listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.